Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. Welcome to a bonus episode of Wake, the podcast that is consistently breaking the speed limit as we head towards fulfilling a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegans Wake out loud just once. I'm your host, Toby Malone, joined once more by the man who loves to read in a group, TJ Young. Hi, TJ.
Oh, hi, Toby. I don't know if I love to read in a group, but I'll do it,
The reason I brought it up is I was wondering if, like reading out loud, like work on a Zoom, if that gives you like COVID PTSD or reading group PTSD.
This is teaching PTSD, because every time I'm teaching a playwriting workshop, I always say, I'm only going to read stage directions. But inevitably, they're like, well, TJ, could you read for this character that I'm not going to tell you has 7 monologues that happened to me 2 weeks ago? And I was like, I've been reading for 14 pages straight, and I want to go insane. I quit acting for a reason.
Yeah, it really throws me back to to COVID when we were producing plays online and trying to sort of figure out how plays would work online, and that just dealing
I
with
just think about you with that
latency
teleprompter app trying to get the pacing down for that one play you did.
Ridiculous. Yeah. So my references today to speed and to reading groups is in specific connection to our esteemed guest. Today we have a representative of the Wake in Progress reading group, or also known as the Ukrainian Wake reading group, who gather every 2 weeks on Zoom to read and discuss the Wake. We are so thrilled to welcome to the Wake Igor Belokrinitsky. Welcome, Igor.
Hi, guys. Toby, TJ, a pleasure joining you here and a pleasure kind of being part of this tradition that you've created. And
it's amazing. After only a year, it's a tradition, but we'll take it. Absolutely. I think the tradition that you're building in the reading group that you've got is just incredible. And I was so thrilled to be introduced to some members of your group during the Maybe Night celebration that Bobby Campbell put together. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you first come to Joyce?
We did, gather recently and talk about kind of Joyce, the Joyce house having many doors and windows through which to enter. Mine was through Pynchon. Pynchon, I think, is kind of widely seen as the American heir to James Joyce. And so I hadn't realized that until I was like halfway through, but then it was too late. And so as I kind of worked my way through Pynchon, I got more interested in kind of his orbit and his kind of circle of influences. And Pynchon inherited a lot and stole and borrowed a lot from Joyce, probably most particularly this kind of combination of high and low, the sacred and the profane, the ancient history that turns into a profane and obscene drinking song and then smoothly transitions back to ancient history. Of course, Pynchon, also being an engineer, added a bunch of formulas because it wasn't complicated enough already. You needed some orbital mechanics to thrown into the mix. So my path was through to Joyce was through Pynchon, and my path to this group was through its tremendous organizers, Linda and Alexandra, who have put it together. And it's just, something I couldn't say no to.
That's amazing. So how did you meet Linda and Alexandra?
I've actually known Linda for decades and decades, and we've been in touch. And she one day, I think I sent her a note because we're both fans of Ulysses. I sent her a note about a reading group in California that had been reading Finnegans Wake for, 40 years.
Yeah, that was the 28-year one that just finished. Yeah,
exactly. And then I said, "Oh, isn't that funny?" And she said, "You know what?"
Amazing.
That kind of sounds like how Toby got me to do this. He was like, "Hey, I want to try this thing," and I was like, "Okay." And then here we are.
I was kind of challenging TJ to tell me it was a bad idea, and he didn't. So I think we're playing a game of literary chicken at the moment, where neither one is willing to be the one to say, "I'm done."
I mean, we're so close. We can't be done. We're done when
That's
we're
it.
finished. That's where we're at.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. And then there are there like no more mountains to climb. And it is, after this, what challenge will you undertake?
We keep being asked that question, and I don't know if we have a satisfactory answer yet.
We had an answer, and then a guest that we talked to maybe about a week and a half ago said that someone else was doing the exact same thing that I had proposed that we do. So I was like, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah,
There
although,
is
yeah.
as you're looking for future challenges, I finished a book by a Hungarian writer, Laszlo Krasznahorkai, and the book has no periods. It is one sentence. It
I
is a
can't
very
do
long
this.
novel with no period. Just technically, it's fascinating. Like even if you just get the free chapter and read through that and see how he does it, and
Uh-huh.
he'll switch like mid sentence. He'll switch the point of view, the perspective. But then like if you've been training was the wake, nothing scares you anymore. You're like, yeah, I can do this. This is fine. You
We're
have a
finding that.
floating point of
Yeah.
view. Don't care. Time jumps can do it. No problem. I've been
So,
trained.
so you're a fan of Ulysses, and you've got all of this background, these credentials with Pynchon and authors like that. But had you read any of the Wake before you came to this group?
No.
Okay, so this is a. But had you read his other work, the
Yeah,
portrait and the
I've read the
Dubliners?
short stories. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, no, nothing can prepare you, right?
No, it really can't. Once you're in, everything else looks kind of simple. I glance back over Ulysses and go, "Oh, I can do this." This is after you've tackled the Wake.
Yeah, yeah, and then we have other group members who've again entered by other doors. I think Robert Anton Wilson is a popular
Right.
gateway drug to, in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
to the Wake as well.
Right. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, obviously, the elephant in the room when it comes to this reading group is that we're in a moment of geopolitical turmoil right now for what's happening in Ukraine, and we are here in Canada. We're great supporters of the Ukrainians, and what's going on politically in America right now is really troubling. We'd love to think that there's a great resolution ahead, but in terms of choosing a book like Finnegans Wake to read for a group, many of whom are in Kiev and who are dealing with the actual um, the actual conflict firsthand, taking on a book like Finnegans Wake feels in some ways appropriate, and in some ways very very odd. It's a very strange choice. I mean, do you find that there's a connection there?
Uh, it is challenging to talk about kind of
Of
national
course, yeah.
characteristics of different people, but I would say that there's an element of stubbornness and perhaps defiance to the Ukrainian character. And I don't think anything signals stubbornness and defiance as much as reading the Wake. I think, of course, an important part of what the group is we do fundraise. Our fee, we have a nominal fee that goes towards the armed forces and to help secure the victory for Ukraine, which is important to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is an important way for us to come together. Uh, and as you said, we have members who are in Kiev, and we've had calls where members had to switch to cellular and light a candle and continue the call with the lights off because there was a raid underway. And is quite surreal to observe from a peaceful place like San Francisco. Um, I think it is tremendous to me how the group is sort of both Ukrainian in its identity as well as highly cosmopolitan. And as hopefully, Toby, you saw on
Mm-hmm.
the call that we have folks from all over the world. We have a variety of different perspectives, but we also, find things in the text that, Joyce has thoughtfully placed for us there. references and interpretations and Easter eggs. The whole thing is kind of made out of Easter eggs, and so we might find Nestor Makhno, the famous to Ukrainians Ukrainian anarchist, in the most recent passage, or there are things like that that we find that are particularly pleasing. So I think it's a sort of an important moment for the Ukrainian civilization. And so it's an important moment for us to come together and discuss this. And of course, there are themes in the book, themes like colonialism, things like independence, things like identity and language, and the nature of kind of being in exile, that very highly resonate with a lot of people who read the Wake, and certainly resonate with us.
I think that's really fascinating because I often think about the things that I find simply because of my dabbling in a few other languages, right? Like I can pick out some German, I can pick out some Spanish, I can pick out some Zulu because I was like on a weird, Duolingo kick for a little bit, and I was like, let's just see what we can learn. But the idea of what's buried in there for individuals from different cultural backgrounds and experiences, I think is really interesting. And I continue to be amazed by the fact that like this was created in a time where there was no internet, where you just had to like that type of knowledge had to be actively sought out, right? So I think it's cool that y'all are finding things that apply to your history and your culture in this text that some would say like, how does he have access to these things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. He's tuned into some kind of a frequency and receiving something. And also, I was, when I was little, I still love going to libraries, and I always had this regret, like, why can't I read all of the books here? And I have this massive FOMO about not being able to read all of the books. And now I can, because like, here it is.
That's right.
So of course it also contains our experience and kind of things that are important to us.
Yeah, the fortitude of the group is so inspiring. The just to hear you say, well, there might be a raid, there might be drones, so we're going to light a candle and go to the basement, but continue reading Finnegans Wake. I think most people around the world would say, forget this book group, I'm going to protect myself or hide my family. So being able to, the defiance of being able to demonstrate that life does not surrender to this kind of terrorism is incredible and so inspiring, and so it's kind of breathtaking coming from it. I'm in a very peaceful place as well in Canada, and so it's almost unthinkable to think about that as life. And so just to see it in action and to see that kind of bravery in the face of it all is really humbling to watch.
And I could tell that y'all had fun because Toby was so I couldn't make it to the group, but Toby was texting me the whole time, so I know that y'all were having a good time with it too.
Yeah, so that was the comment. So yeah, just to transition over, is that last Sunday I was invited by the members of the group to TJ and I were both invited as guests to the group as for this most recent reading as the hosts of Wake, just because we've formed the relationship with the members of the group. And TJ is busy planning a wedding, so he was unable to make it. But I came along and was thrilled to be invited in. It was a 2-hour discussion. We covered maybe 3 pages of the text. And I was very touched to see that with my presence, everyone switched into English. Which I read later on your page, that you speak in English if you have an English speaking guest, and if not, then you speak in Ukrainian, which again just bends my mind in a Joycean way that you're able to flip back and forth in that way.
Yeah, the group is very facile, and we do switches, and sometimes we have guests from other kind of language backgrounds, and we will dip into other languages that are relevant. It may be Italian or German. People bring their knowledge as they can. We're trying to pick up some Gaelic as we go along, and so one of our members, Jerry, brings in and gives us the references that are so very Irish. And so yeah, it is a very cosmopolitan conversation. We do have fun, and I would say perhaps one more thing to say on the geopolitical front is there is, I will admit, some schadenfreude, because one of the ongoing themes in the book is this tale of the shooting of the Russian general during the
Right.
Crimean War, and I think that that kind of engenders double rations for the drinking game whenever the Russian general is yet again shot.
Yeah, so this is a question that I had. So Toby texted me. He was like, they're drinking while reading this book, which for me, this is something I have to encounter stone cold sober, like maybe not even food in my stomach because it's the only thing I can process. Can you walk us through like the drinking game and how you land on it, or does it modulate? I used to have a drinking game with the show True Blood, which is extremely more juvenile, but every time they said the word maker, we'd drink, and there were some episodes where we just had to stay the night, you know. I'm interested in how you apply those two things.
Uh, I, so I thought about this a little bit. I think we all kind of deploy different sense making mechanisms to try to figure out and kind of navigate the book, and we process it in different ways. So I think the most remarkable way is Linda, the who co-founded the group, was Alexander. She produces these spectacular mind maps that
Mm.
sort of document how she navigates the book and how the different themes connect and how different words pop up. And it's very kind of cinematic and visual. And that's kind of her way of navigating this. And I do tables because I'm much more of a linear thinker and I try to put things inside a box. So I do tables and matrices. And Alexander, I think, generally relates everything to the Sephiroth and Kabbalah and finds esoteric explanations, and that's how he makes sense of it. And other group members have different ways of making sense of the book. And one of the ways that we found of making sense of it and kind of encouraging this closed reading is to reward the closed reading, to
Mm.
reward the finding of themes, to reward of the finding and chasing down of literary illusions. And the way we have of rewarding it is, okay, now you can, have a sip, now you can have a drink. And it seems like very much, especially if it's, something appropriate like Guinness or Irish whiskey, perhaps, uh, then it becomes an additional level of kind of intellectual lubricant. And sometimes things start making a lot more sense by the end of the excerpt, or perhaps you just like less worried about things not making sense, and then you become okay with it and you relax. And I'm not a golfer, but they say that like your swing gets a lot better after you've had a beverage, because you're more relaxed now, you're looser, you're not as
Right.
stiff. And so I think it's that kind of intellectual unstiffening that happens, that is performance enhancing here. So yeah, so as we sort of settled into our cadence as a group over several uh, half dozen readings or so, we started developing some of these rituals. And then I think somebody noticed, oh, very often as we go through it, like 3 pages or so, as Toby said, at a time, very often a mention of alcohol is right next to the mention of sex. And so whenever we see that pairing of sex and alcohol, even though it's like encoded, uh, we notice it, and okay, that's worth a celebration. Or very often, again, there's the Russian general gets shot. Uh, Points of view switch. There's certain things. A nursery rhyme is brought up. So last time, one of the drinking cues was a nursery rhyme, and there are a bunch of those thrown in. Some are a bit more intellectual. So, for example, one of our visiting member has the theory about language cluster, where there'll be a bunch of words in, I don't know, Armenian in the text, and then somewhere in the kind of the entourage of these words there'd actually be the word Armen that's referring to kind of the Armenian language.
Mm.
And so when you notice that, you might drink. So before our gathering, Usually Linda will send out the list of drinking cues for today, and it'll be like an Oscar Wilde reference, things of that. And so again, it encourages people to read it more closely. One of the drinking cues is somebody has a crazy theory, so that also encourages wild theorizing and going off on crazy tangents, and that also I think adds something to the discussion.
This moment that I'm sad that we record in the middle of the day, Toby.
It's true.
Usually between meetings.
Well, it was noon in Toronto when I joined the meeting, so everyone else was in the evening and ready to have a drink. So I was drinking water, which was very sad, but I was keeping up. But yeah, it was a very kind of confronting thing. The day before the meeting, I got an email from Alexander saying, "We're looking forward to having you, and here is the list." And I thought, I don't understand what this is. And so the list for this week is that, so yeah, it says here, I'm just reading off the email. During our sessions, we recap the previous fragment, read and discuss the text of the current fragment. We play a drinking game. Here is a list of cues. When we uncover those during our discussion, we take a sip of your preferred beverage. So the fragments list for this week was any reference to HC or ALP. So anytime you find one of those, here
comes everybody.
Yeah, exactly. A human conger reel is my favorite one. Coincidentia oppositorium, horrible histories, sex and booze, lots of macaroni and nursery rhymes, references to hats and boots. We've heard this song before, references to songs. Return of the King, references to the Lord of the Rings, because I guess Linda is a Lord of the Rings scholar. Any reference to Thunder words, and then someone has a weird theory. And I was very pleased that I was able to contribute to that by saying, I have a weird theory about this section we just read, because something triggered something in my brain about something later in the text about a reference to Guinness, but it was sort of hidden deeply. And I said, I think this is a reference to that reference, which is a reference over here. And everyone happily drank to my weird theory, which I thought I was contributing. And then the other thing that was added is there's also a matrix for alliteration that is developed here, and I'm going to post this on our show notes. I'm going to just hold that up to the screen so TJ can see it. But there's a little matrix of alliteration that's available where
I love that,
where everyone's tracking the amount of a number of alliterations that happen in that segment that is being read, along with a challenge. I guess one member of the group was challenged with finding some buried reference, like a treasure hunt. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's a little bit of a scavenger hunt that happens. And again, I think it encourages close reading. I think it also makes this whole process generative and not just consumptive. So we're not just consuming the work, we're trying to generate something. And so I think the most generative thing is Linda's mind maps. They're beautiful, they're frameable, they're
I look forward to
something to stare at for a long time to find all the goodness in them. But I think we, like other members, are trying to also figure out what to generate. I'll occasionally write a limerick dedicated to a particular segment, or make a matrix that again attempts to take information and find some sort of a pattern or impose some sort of a framework on it and try to get to, from territory to the map. But of course, because the information here is so dense, it is almost uncompressible. Like, it is very difficult to squeeze it into something without losing a whole bunch of meaning. It's, all killer, no filler, as the kids say.
That's right. Well, I think it's clear that here on Wake, we are definitely consumptive, not generative.
I was going to say, we're coming to the picnic with our own basket, and you pull up in a food truck, right?
Yeah, we're just churning our way through. Whereas, as I said, we covered 3 pages, 7111 to 7419, in 2 hours, with 3 separate readings. And I liked that there was an opportunity where it was a reading of maybe 3/4 of a page, or a page and a quarter maybe, and then pause and discussion for a period. Whereas we tend to just ram through for 45 minutes or an hour and then
look at each other with a stupefied smile.
What just happened?
Exactly. But the discussion was so rich. I found I was really impressed with the depth of knowledge and the depth of analysis. A lot of these scavenger hunt points, empire versus authority, batting time, Gog's curse to it, two Nestors, hypnagogia, like these references to elements that happen within these 3 pages that may be only uncovered with Fweet, but the challenge is, can we find it? And we got to the point where there was one reference to Nestor, the Greek figure, and everyone said, that's one Nestor, where's the second Nestor? And Linda wouldn't let it go until everyone found the last Nestor, which, as you said, was a Ukrainian reference. Not only are there puzzles presented, they're puzzles solved, which is really useful too.
That's right. I think we discovered Wheat, partway into our journey. And then it sort of, I think, switches to easy mode a little bit because you do have that resource.
Right.
And you can go and look things up. And so again, then that becomes a challenge. Like, what else can I contribute? What else can I find that Fweed hasn't already found and explained and nicely packaged for us to consume? And so I think that's partly what, and again, there are all these rabbit holes. It's made of rabbit holes, and you can just keep following the rabbit holes, and for a certain type of personality, I think it's a great opportunity. There's a Japanese term, otaku, which is like an obsessive fan. And I think that, I think started kind of the anime world, but expanded to a broader kind of, you can be an otaku about, I don't know, World War II tanks or something. And so I think we just end up with a bunch of Joyce otaku. And I think as a consequence, you then start connecting the dots. And I think it raises your overall education level. It raises your overall like cultural level because you start recognizing connections and links. And so I think recently we were chatting on Telegram, was at a concert, and there was a piece by Debussy, and it mentioned the program that he was inspired by a traditional song called Keel Row. Keel Row appeared in one of the previous segments that we discussed. We'll listen to the song. We discussed the industry of coal mining and transportation of coal from along the River Tyne to London. And so it's like, oh, okay, I am now more informed. I now can recognize an obscure musical reference, and I feel good about that.
Yeah, Joyce really encourages that kind of unpacking, where he says, yeah, this means what you think it means, but it also means everything else that it could mean. Not just maybe. There's not a double meaning. Like Benedict says in Much Ado About Nothing, there's a double meaning in that. I think in Joyce, it's a double meaning is just where you start, and so being able to find that those layers really encourages that kind of inquiry. And so I think this kind of structure of 3 pages at a time, I think I'd noticed on the invitation that we're 71 pages in, and this was your 28th meeting.
That's right.
Whereas I think we're on the 40-somethingth episode of Wake, and we're 600 pages in.
There are extremes. I believe the New York group reads like 1 page at a time. I think there are other groups that are slower, slower even in their reading. I think they tend to be more literary and more analytical and more. I think in one of your previous podcasts, you talked about how there's like the professionals, and I we're by no means professionals. I think we're largely dilettantes here, but. So we've I think picked a moderate pace to do a relatively close reading, but not become so mired in it that we're writing a thesis on every word that we encounter.
And particularly, I like the fact that it's not exclusive. It didn't feel like you needed to have a PhD to be in the room, and it didn't feel like you needed to be an expert. I feel as though if you had someone come in who had never experienced Joyce before, they'd be just as welcome as someone who is an expert. And Linda was saying in the meeting she'd heard one of our previous episodes where my daughter had read on the podcast, and she said, I'd never even considered that, having a child read Finnegans Wake, but I'm going to get my daughter to do it too, because I hadn't even considered that could be an option. And it was sort of nice to be able to make that connection where it's very much a group that isn't saying there is an entry fee of knowledge in order to, although the discussion is incredibly high level in terms of its intellectual rigor, which I really appreciated as well. Because we don't offer that here at Wake.
Toby knows that. Toby's the one who's like, hi, there's this deep reference to this historical moment. And I'm like, this is where he's talking about sex. And that's the dichotomy between us and our approach to the analysis of the work.
Fortunately, Joyce is always talking about sex.
Always. Which, I've said before, and I'll say it again, was the thing that caught me by surprise the most when digging into the text. I was like, this is kind of filthy, and I'm kind of here for it. I'm interested, what's the thing that going through this process has caught you the most unawares, or has been the most illuminating for you thus far?
I think it's perhaps this generative desire to make something out of the text and use it as a prompt, and make it my own that way. Not just by saying I've read it, I've eaten it, but that I've produced something out of it. And I think Linda at some point challenged me to write a poem, and so I've been doing these limericks and things. And again, other group members are doing the same thing, and so I think that generative urge that Joyce has awakened in us, or for some of the group members encouraged further that they already had it. I think that has been interesting, because that's kind of one of the ways we're processing it. So I think that has been a delight.
Yeah, and I think that has also been one of the things that I've found. I want to say one of the best parts of the Joycean community is that we continue to interact with more and more people who are using this as a jumping off point for their own creativity, their own ventures. And sometimes I feel lucky about the fact that I have my own creative practice, because there are times where I don't even know where to begin with this. But I love the fact that y'all are creating things from this text as you're going through it at such a intentional pace.
I'll add one more thing I've been thinking about, which is, for all of us in the group, at least for kind of the permanent members, English is a second language. And when it is your second language, you have fewer preconceived notions. You kind of approach the language, and it's not something you kind of absorbed with mother's milk. So you kind of look at things and you don't necessarily assume that they should be this way. You just, okay, well, these are the rules. I learned the rules. I learned the grammar. It sounds like this. It looks like this. You don't take it for granted, because you didn't grow up in it. And Joyce does not take English for granted. He smashes it. There's a great word in the last segment, wedgewords. He has these wedgewords he kind of injects into the wall and hits them with the hammer until kind of the language structure is smashed up, and then he recreates. Then he makes new. He reinvents, and he yanks you out of your comfort zone, where you're used to reading this wall of words and your eyes kind of glaze over, and you're like, yeah, okay, I got it. And you can skip 30-40% of the words and still get what's coming at you. You can't do that with the Wake, right? You cannot afford to ignore words, and to get you to pay attention, he will create new words that are unusual and unexpected, and kind of cut across all the noise, and just yank you by the throat and say, pay attention, look at this. This is new and different and unexpected. You have not seen this said in this particular way. So that unique ability to make something familiar new and get you to pay attention to it is just really tremendous. And we live in this kind of attention economy, and we have all of this stuff that's competing for our attention. His ability to do that, to get your attention, get you a complex concept across to you, is pretty amazing. And then some of these words are like, why is this not in wider circulation? This is a useful word. Like we had one a few weeks ago, was distinguish, to have there three things you're trying to tell a difference between. Like that's really helpful.
Right.
We sometimes choose between three things. We distinguish. Yeah, so that is a great gift that he gives us, every time we read, is these wedge words that kind of break open the language and break open our thinking, and are completely lateral and unexpected and delightful.
Do you find, though, that can be a barrier when you're, obviously you've been in the States for a long time, so you're very fluent. I'm just trying to imagine, languages were never my friend. I was never much good at second languages when I was at school. So I kind of let it go. But generally, when you're reading something in another language, you're looking for the words that are familiar, or the grammar that is familiar, or the rules that are familiar that you understand. And if there's a piece of vocabulary you don't understand, you can maybe define it, or you can look it up in the dictionary and figure out what it means, and then think, oh, well, that word means this thing, and then you can fill in those gaps. But if you discover a coinage, or discover a portmanteau, or something that is corrupted to the point where it's been sort of smashed and put back together again, that feels like a major barrier. Like, for example, I was thinking recently about, there's a French, my French is very, very bad. I took enough French just to pass my exams at university, but nothing more. But there's a French singer who's very well known for her wordplay in French. But if you were to look at it without any kind of knowledge of the French language, you wouldn't understand any of that wordplay, because you don't understand the pun that she's making within the language. And so I'm just fascinated to know, as a non-native speaker, what these portmanteaus do in this already daunting process.
I guess personally, I have an unfair advantage over some of my other group members, because I have, as you said, lived here for a long time, and so much easier for me was English. And so perhaps for me, this is more valuable than for some of the other members. But I do think that everybody finds something. Everybody finds a spot they can stand on, however big or small, and orient themselves to the pages, and start getting their bearings, and then start appreciating, kind of stop and smell the roses and start appreciating the goodness of the passage. And you have these, I think, since you brought up bad French, points de rappel. So these are like when you're climbing a mountain, there are places where you put your hooks in, and that you anchor yourself to, and that give you that safety, that purchase. And then you find the next point and the next point, and kind of climb your way up. And for somebody, those might be the drinking cues. And hey, I found, three Freudian things here that are like right on the surface. And then for somebody, it'd be like, oh, I'm a Lewis Carroll fan, and I found Lewis Carroll things, and now it feels like home. I found something comfortable. And then again, you start feeling more playful. And I think that playful approach, which the group has adopted, and things like drinking games help preserve that element of play, that kind of bulldozes over all problems and challenges. Like, okay, I don't understand this. I'm okay with not understanding this. Much smarter people and much more educated people than me readily admit to not understanding this and being okay with that. And that's kind of part of the deal. So I'll just hang on and ride together with my colleagues and friends and compatriots, and enjoy myself and giggle at the sex jokes.
Yeah. I feel that, because I feel like a lot of this book has been me feeling like I felt when I first learned how to read complex books. I was like, oh, there's a level of like, you just have to go with it, that I think is really kind of it's one of the most fun I've had reading in a long time, which is great.
Yeah, we try to have as much fun as we can with it, because to do away with the onus of meaning means that we can just sit back and admire that someone generated this work, just the audacity of its existence. And then when we see the flashes of what we do understand or what we can get. I mean, one thing that we do, and I think I remember in the reading group that I visited last week, the reading was preceded with a summary, I believe. So we have a love-hate, mostly hate relationship with the Oxford World Classics. The Oxford World Classics edition has a chapter-by-chapter breakdown, which we found early on, and we've just been using at the end of every episode to sort of summarize what we read, but we're becoming more and more disdainful of its content because we feel as though it's just telling us the one thing that's happening, the very boring thing that's happening, but none of the actual content. It's just sort of telling us narrative, but narrative is kind of immaterial in this world, and so then why we so I mean, in the summary that was read, and I'm sorry I can't remember the detail of what was actually put together, but is that generated from a source or from a member's perspective?
So I'm the summary guy.
You're the right, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I think at some point I was asked to do a recap, and I guess I did a good job because now I do the recaps.
Right. Great.
And again, I think it is a generative part, and by note, like recapping is futile. There's a great Monty Python skit, Summarize Proust competition, where it's like a game show and they compete in summarizing Proust. It is extremely politically incorrect, but it's still very funny. And so yes, recapping the Wake is a bit like summarizing Proust. Is going to be completely idiotic and pointless. And so in a recap, for me, it's a way to, and I think for the rest of the group, it's a way to squeeze a tiny bit more enjoyment from the previous segment that we finished before moving to the next segment. And so that's and it gets recapped twice, right? First of all, Linda creates her beautiful map, her mind map of the segment that we read, and it's kind of her interpretation, her sense making of the previous episode. And again, it's highly creative, it's non-linear, it shows you unexpected linkages between different things that we saw. And then in my recap, it'll be like 5% content, 95% riffing on kind of what struck me about the previous segment. And I might pick out a couple of words that were particularly meaningful that perhaps we didn't discuss last time. And so in the most recent recap that you were there for, I talked a little bit about the characterization of HCE as a pattern mind, and how that reminded me of Odysseus, and then you brought up Cyrano and the lists of insults. So it is, the recap is not the recap. It's just, again, it's a little bonus to put to bed the most recent segment and transition to the new segment.
Sounds much more useful than the Oxford World's Classic. Which, yeah.
If Oxford World's Classic just flattens everything to a point where you're like, this is the... If someone was like, okay, this is what the Wake is, no one would read the Wake based on Oxford World's Classic definition, like, at all.
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't.
No, it's it gives us some very brief summary points where you figure out where the characters are moving from place to place. But since it's a dreamscape, it's kind of irrelevant how people move or who's there or who, So we tend to we continue to read it just because to give that sort of completion. But yeah, I think your way is more allied to how we get to the end and start breaking things down. But I want to just spend a little time focusing on, we've brought it up 2 or 3 times now. Linda makes these mind maps, and I'm going to link to these in our show notes. And TJ, I think you have you've seen a link to them. So these are beautiful. These are beautiful so as mind maps, they're very much word based. It's very artistic. It's taking these this section. So I'm just looking, for example, at the museum room section, and we have Napoleon in there and on a horse, and lots of different keywords that have come out. Lots of different interesting puns, and there's things written in English, but also there's there lots of different kinds of languages that are put in there. So these are beautiful, and like you said, frameable. So is this Linda's specialty? How did she first come up with these?
I think she has done versions of this for, before we started this Wake journey. I think she uses some of those in her lectures. I think it's just kind of how she makes sense of the world. And we are just kind of privileged to be at the party where this is happening. And I think she did one, I think after one of our readings, and it received very high acclaim. And so then I think I assume felt obligated to continue. And again, we're very, very great. Now, like this is again, it binds the community further because now it's again a shared ritual, and we have a reading, and then the clock starts, and we wait for the mind map to come out. To again enjoy and get another bite of the segment that we read and said, oh, because it'll also reflect the discussion that we had. It's not just a summary of the segment; it's a summary of the discussion that we had about the segment, and who said what, and what points were brought up, and what happened in the discussion that was notable or funny or unexpected, or the crazy theory that got brought up. So it is not just she's not just reflecting the text, she's reflecting us, and we all just want a mirror, and this is a mirror that she's holding up to us as well.
That's such a great thing to be able to walk away from the experience and like have some sort of colorful, tangible thing to just represent the journey. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of. It's very similar in style. So Peter O'Brien, who is a friend of the podcast, he was on a recent episode, and his artistic approaches to the Wake, where he does his art on top of the text of the Wake and creates these explosions of meaning in various coloured inks, much like Linda does. They feel like cousin projects. I'm sure there's no huge relationship, but it's interesting that the way that this is interpreted is really it feels very much like a version of the Wake that is aimed at an audience's or a reader's entertainment, as opposed to what the Wake is, which is very much folded in on itself and saying you need to work for it. Whereas this is very generous in what it offers to the viewer. Every time you look at a different corner, you get something new.
That's right. And it's kind of choose your own adventure, because you can decide you want to start in the middle and work to the edges, or you want to start at a corner and make your way to the middle. So you can explore it the way you want it, as a remix. It's not rigid. Because there's another kind of art, I don't know, style that I think of when I read The Wake, which is Joseph Cornell, and he creates these beautiful boxes, right, or created. So once you see a box, you like recognize it as a Cornell, and there are these boxes that have little sections in them, and each section has something, and it's this collection of objects. It's kind of bric-a-brac that seems random, but somehow has a unity when placed into this box. But the great thing I think about what Linda does is there are no little boxes. Everything is connected. Everything sort of flows together. It's integrated. Even though like there's a random component to it, there's a unity to it as well. And I think that makes it like more valuable and precious somehow.
Speaking of the generative stuff that you and the group have created from it, and I kind of want to turn it back to you. Earlier, you said that when you make poems, you write limericks. What made you land on the limerick form to capture your expression of the piece?
I think it's the Irishness. I think it's the an important Irish art form. which I was happy to culturally appropriate and remix as we have done here. It's not always a limerick, but that one just, it seems like very appropriate and like Joyce would approve, I feel like.
I love that. Yeah, I use I teach my students haikus whenever they are confronting their own work, and one of the students are like, "Why haikus, TJ?" I was like, "Because it's limited and it forces you to really think about it." But also limericks are just fun. Especially for me, whenever anyone says limerick, I cannot think of a limerick outside of like an NPR show. Wait, don't tell me. They have limericks of the news
Yes.
every week. But growing up, I encountered limericks that were always filthy, always dirty.
Yeah.
I didn't know a limerick could not be filthy until NPR.
So I think that's one inspiration. The other one is there's an institution that awards the Ig Nobel Awards. These are awards given to scientific research that I think they describe it first makes you laugh and then makes you think. So these are like ridiculous scientific papers. They do publish a journal, and one of the things they do is they will have limericks about scientific papers. And so if you can write a limerick about a scientific paper, you surely can write a limerick about a couple of pages of the Wake.
Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to think about the Wake as generative in that way. And I think it had this reputation for a long time, for maybe 60, 70 years after it was published, where it was seen as impenetrable. It was just a block of, I mean, obviously there were scholars who were reading it and people, and there were champions of it throughout, but usually it was seen to be this monolith that existed just to be obtuse and not really expected to generate anything. Whereas I think Joyce would be thrilled now with seeing all of the ways that the Wake are being taken and appropriated and expanded and explored. It's becoming much more mainstream. I got a message last night from our good friend Sarah Kane, who's a previous guest on the podcast, who lives in Dublin, who has just been accepted as a volunteer at the James Joyce at the Tower in Sandy Cove, in the Martello Tower, and so she's going to come in and one of the things she said when she was interviewing there was that she wanted to be able to bring Finnegans Wake out to the tourists as much as Ulysses is out there. And I feel as though Wake is becoming much more mainstream because of things like this, the groups that are saying, yeah, we could read Ulysses, but why not try Finnegans Wake? And then once doing it, how do we understand it? Well, we can understand it through limerick, or we can understand it through mind maps, or through other kinds of imagery or podcasting. There's lots of, it's a good time to be a Wakeist, I think.
Absolutely. And I think you've already mentioned it multiple times, but we are an inclusive group. We are a welcoming group, and we would very much welcome anybody interested in the Wake and willing to put up with the group dynamics. I
am sure that there are plenty of people who'd be interested. How would they get in touch if they were interested in doing that?
I to the extent that you have show notes, we can provide our email addresses, and
Wonderful.
We are also on Blue Sky. And so we'll give a way to get in touch with us, and then we welcome people joining. Happy to do it in English, and Toby, you can attest that the good time will be had.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful time. I'm planning to come back in the future, because it's one of those. It's a really interesting way in, particularly since I think when we got to page 70 of the book, I think that was maybe last June or something. About a month in, we were really hustling. And so it was nice to revisit something that we'd already read, and also come back with fresh eyes, having gone through the wars that is book 2, and get ready for book 2, because that is a whole other level.
I just think about I also think about night lessons and how oh man.
Yeah, book 2, chapter 2. Yeah.
It's scruff McGruff rough. You know.
Yeah, and we're not going to give any spoilers. We're also not going to discourage, because I think I'm fascinated to know what will come out of that more challenging chapter, because there's so many ways into it, and we took one way in, and it was moderately successful. The way that we read it with 3 readers, and we changed perspectives as we went. And I'm not certain that it was the best for the listeners, but it was certainly good for us to sort of get a handle on it and understand it. We had a guest last week, Neil Kaisai-Meyer, who memorizes the Wake. That's his thing. And so he performed all of 2-2, which is night lessons, live in front of an audience, having memorized it all. And that was his way in. And so I'm really curious to know what the Wake and Progress group's way in will be for that chapter, and for the other challenging ones going forward.
Yeah, that's the only chapter that scarred me, and it had nothing to do with the text and everything to do with the fact that we recorded 3 episodes back to back. And then 10 minutes before we were done, my internet connection cut out, and I said, I cannot do this again.
I thought we were going to lose TJ that day. I thought he was finally going to tap out of the whole thing, but
like, TJ, could he also read these parts? And
yes,
to your earlier point.
Yeah. But well, this is terrific. I mean, there's so much insight into what you're doing, and so much of an exciting perspective on the Wake, something very different to what we're doing. And I love that there's this cacophony of perspectives on the Wake that's generating right now, and all of it's valid. There's no one who is doing it in a more important way than anyone else. You sort of have to add all of the pieces together to get a sort of a 4D view of what this book is doing. And I love the fact that we can be part of the conversation, and you can be part of the conversation, and no one is elbowing anyone aside saying, we're the official group and you are the amateurs, get out of here. It's such an inclusive space.
Somebody might be doing that, but we've never heard of them. So
I've never heard of them. Yeah, it's
that's because they decided to not talk to us. So
that's right. I'm sure there's
a pope, a Joyce Pope that decides what the orthodoxy is, but we just don't know them.
Maybe, but we had the Joyce Pope on the Maybe night. Raphael from Fleet was there.
That fair enough. Yes.
And he's very welcoming and open to all of this sort of stuff. So if the man who organizes Fleet is on board, then who's going to say anything against anyone? So it's wonderful. Is in terms of, and I'll also put in the show notes if there. I'll ask you to provide me with some information about places where, if anyone wants to make donations to the Ukrainian war effort, if anyone is interested in knowing more about what's going on there's a lot of propaganda that's out there at the moment. The current US president is making things harder on everyone right now, and we just want to let you know that you have our full and undivided support, and that's the majority of the world out there. I think we have. There are some tyrants who are trying very hard to make things difficult for people, and I'm so filled with admiration for the way that the Ukrainian people are sticking to their guns and hanging in there and really defying this kind of tyranny. It's quite remarkable.
It means a lot, and again, it means a lot to the group to be able to contribute in some small way to these efforts and support people who are on the front lines fighting. And yes, it is very helpful to be reassured that the world has not gone completely mad, and black is not white today, and
right, some
things are can still be relied on. So yes,
even if that's just Finnegans Wake.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We've taken up a lot of your time. I know it's early where you are, so we'll let you get to start your day started. But thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure having you on Wake this week.
Toby, TJ, it's a delight. It's a privilege to represent the group, and again to join you as you're completing your journey, and we're just starting ours, and it's an inspiration for us, and we'll continue having a good time, and again, welcome everyone to join us.
Wonderful, excellent. Well, yeah, and I will say that Sasha and and Linda were. I invited the three of you to come on, and everyone agreed that having you on to represent the group might mean that there were fewer voices in the room to talk over one another. But I was hoping to have the whole group on, and then cooler heads prevailed, and you said, "Well, actually, no, I'll just speak for the group," which makes more sense, I think, for the quality of the recording.
Good. We'll hopefully make it happen and get everybody together. And then please come and join us again. And TJ would love to have you too. You'll have a good time too.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, that is all the time we have this week for Wake. We'll return next week to continue with our reading as we keep on keeping on. I've been Toby Malone, joined as ever by TJ Young. Thank you, TJ.
Of course.
I love having you here. And it has been our true honor and pleasure to have Igor Belokrinitsky here with us. I'm going to link to all of the work of the Wake in Progress group and all of the ways that you can support the Ukrainian cause in our show notes. We'll see you next week, and stand with Ukraine. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegans Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegans Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegans Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.